Imagine pressing your ear against the scorched crust of the earth and hearing, faint but unmistakable, the clash of mandible on mandible, the hiss of formic acid, the shrill death cry of 1,000 soldiers whose entire universe is a patch of cracked soil, no bigger than your palm. Above, the sun is just another burning sky god. Below, tunnels collapse and reform like capillaries in a dying lung. One colony has breached the other's fortress wall, and now waves of amber-eyed gladiators pour through the breach, each ant a living arrow tipped with poison. A single queen's pheromone signature is the flag they fight for. Her chamber lies only centimeters away, yet the battlefront is already littered with severed heads and legs, twitching like dropped matchstick. This isn't metaphor. This is ant war. An underground Gettysburg fought every hour on every continent, invisible to most of us, but as epic, as brutal, and as consequential as any human siege. Ready to descend and witness? Let's start with the quiet before the storm. You're crouched in a city park at dawn, dew still jeweling the grass, when you notice two black dots, tiny, almost comical, touching antennae on a pebble. They freeze, circle, freeze again. To you, it's a polite handshake. To them, it's a full biometric scan, colony scent, caste, task history, even recent diet. A fraction of a second later, they part ways, each sprinting back to her respective nest entrance. Within minutes, the ground begins to vibrate. Not metaphorically. Literally. Stridulations, little scraping sounds ants make with their legs, travel through soil like Morse code. Chemical flares go up too. Alarm pheromones, high volatility molecules that evaporate fast, so the message doesn't linger longer than the crisis demands. By the time you've finished your coffee, two invisible empires have declared war. Why here? Why now? Because a colony's survival is a math problem written in calories. Every larva that needs to be fed, every worker that needs fuel, every queen that must pump out eggs, all of it costs energy. Territory is simply a bank account of sugar, protein, and moisture. The moment the balance sheet tips negative, say, a drought shrivels aphid farms, or a careless lawnmower slices through a honeydew pipeline, the colony's algorithms switch from grow to invade. But ants don't launch wars the way we do. They don't have generals staring at map. Instead, the decision emerges from millions of tiny data points collected by Scout. Each Scout is a roving sensor, tasting sugar gradients, humidity pockets, the density of prey items. When a Scout finds a gold mine, a mulberry tree dripping sap, a caterpillar hatch, a rival nest crammed with fat larvae, she rushes home laying down a pheromone trail that's part Yelp review, part battle plan. The stronger the resource signal, the thicker the trail, the more sisters follow. If two trails intersect, and both lead to the same prize, conflict is inevitable. Take Linapotema humilis, the Argentine ant. In California, these ants have erased almost every native competitor, because they wage what ecologists call supercolony war. Instead of small, separate nests that skirmish over crumbs, they form a single meganest stretching hundreds of miles. When a native Prenolopus in Paris colony smells the Argentine advance, it's like watching a medieval village realize the Mongol horde just crested the hill. The front line is a living conveyor belt. Attackers arriving fresh, dying, and being replaced every few minutes, while defenders collapse from sheer attrition. But even within the same species, not all colonies fight the same way. Some are pacifists. Temnothorax ants prefer to pack up the queen and larvae and flee, abandoning their fortress rather than risk the gene pool. Others are siege masters. Atta leafcutters will starve an enemy fungus garden by blocking ventilation shafts, until the rival colony's food supply literally rots from the inside. The strategy depends on the niche each lineage has carved out over millennia. A desert species can't afford to waste water on a prolonged battle, so it opts for blitzkrieg. A rainforest species, surrounded by year-round abundance, can afford attritional trench warfare that lasts weeks. Now zoom in on the first clash. Picture a narrow tunnel, walls polished to a glassy sheen by millions of feet. Two scouts meet head-on, But this time the chemical handshake fails. They're from different colonies. Instantly, their bodies arc like drawn bows. Mandibles gape. A droplet of venom beads at the tip of each stinger. They slam together with the force of coiled springs, grappling in a silence broken only by the rasp of exoskeleton on exoskeleton. The victor doesn't pause to gloat. She drags the corpse aside and races deeper into enemy territory, laying a fresh trail that smells of panic and opportunity. Within 60 seconds, the first wave of soldiers follows. Here's the part that still baffles entomologists. How does a colony know when to escalate? There is no central command. Yet, somehow the local skirmish ripples outward until thousands of workers are mobilized. The answer lies in positive feedback loops. Each returning scout brings not just chemical news but literal samples, bits of enemy cuticle soaked in foreign scent. Nestmates cluster around, tasting the alien hydrocarbons, and the more alien the smell, the more ants switch from foraging to fighting roles. Biologists call this adaptive demography. In human terms, it's like a neighborhood watch that turns into a militia within minutes because one guy walked in wearing the wrong color. And the battlefield itself? It's chosen by accident yet shaped by design. A crack in the sidewalk, a root hollow, the underside of a discarded burger box. Any choke point becomes Thermopylae. Ants don't care about aesthetics. They care about geometry. A tunnel that narrows to one ant width creates a natural kill zone where defenders can hold off 10-to-1 odds. Conversely, an open gravel patch favors the colony that can field the largest majors. Those muscle-bound soldiers, with heads like obsidian shields. Watch closely, and you'll see micro-tactics that would make a Roman centurion proud. Some species deploy living doors, workers whose heads are literally plug-shaped, wedging into tunnel mouths to create a movable barricade. Others use chemical artillery. Formica ants can spray formic acid in a fine mist that corrodes both enemy armor and the enemy's own pheromone trails, turning the battlefield into a sensory wasteland. And then there are the suicide bombers. Colobopsis cylindrica workers in Southeast Asia have evolved enlarged mandibular glands that rupture on impact, spraying sticky glue that entangles both victim and attacker in a macabre embrace. Their final act is to block the tunnel like a cork made of dying flesh. But before the carnage scales up, there's a moment, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, when both colonies are still probing, still gauging. Scouts skitter along the border, trading threats like fencers testing reach. The ground itself becomes a blackboard of chemical equations. Red dots for danger, blue arcs for safe passage, yellow spirals that scream, food here. To us it's dirt. To them, it's a glowing hologram of risk and reward. And then, almost imperceptibly, the switch flips. A single ant makes contact too hard, bites too deep, and the border ignites. The sound is unsettling. Thousands of tiny jaws snapping shut in unison, like rice grains thrown on a snare drum. The soil darkens, not with blood, but with the oily sheen of crushed abdomens. Above ground you might notice only a faint rustle in the grass, but 3 centimeters down, an empire is bleeding. This is the niche of war, a place where resource scarcity meets evolutionary ingenuity, where every blade of grass can become a watchtower, and every pebble a fortress wall. And once the first body falls, there's no calling it off. The colony's genetic code has already voted. The battlefield is open. The question now is not whether the war will happen, but how savage it will become, and whether anything will remain when the tunnels finally go quiet. Picture sinking through the crust of a park path until the sunlight narrows to a green slit above your head, and finally winks out. The air turns wet and warm, tasting of fungus and hot resin. The walls around you are no longer dirt. They're glass-smooth tunnels sculpted by millions of feet, each curve calculated to keep temperature and humidity within a 2-degree band. Light a match. If matches were ant-sized, and you'd see the walls sparkle with a thin grease of alarm pheromone, pre-laid tripwires ready to scream. Intruder the instant a foreign hydrocarbon brushes them. This is the fortress of a single colony, and every inch is weaponized. Side pockets to the left hold sleeping majors, stacked like obsidian cannonballs, heads swollen so wide they have to enter rooms sideways. To the right, a chimney rises in a gentle spiral, rifled like the barrel of a rifle to vent hot cone and pull fresh oxygen down the main arteries. Engineers in human skyscrapers call it stack ventilation. Ants patented it 60 million years ago. But the really clever stuff is invisible. Along the ceiling run faint streaks of iridescent oil, alarm trails drawn by sentries the way medieval archers once chalked kill zones on castle floors. Step on the streak, and the molecular signature flips. Identity, direction, even the stress level of the ant who laid it. Within 2 seconds, the entire city changes posture. Larvae vanish into the deepest nursery. Foragers pivot back toward the queen, and the plug-headed soldiers lumber away. Now, watch from the attacker's side. 20 centimeters away, about a marathon through compacted clay, another colony has spent the night drilling. Their scouts have sketched a 3D map in pheromone ink. Every pebble, every root hair, every pocket of moist sand. The prize is a ventilation shaft that surfaces beneath a dandelion root. Drop straight down that shaft, and you're 3 turns from the enemy queen's chamber. The first scout pokes her head out inside the shaft. The air tastes clean, no alarm, no acid tang. She backs down, swaps a droplet of scent with the relay worker behind her. Path clear? Follow fast. That droplet is a data packet. The worker races back to the staging area where thousands of ants coil like a spring wound to breaking. The spring releases. A black river pours through the shaft. Leading the wedge are supermajors, ants whose exoskeletons creak under their own muscle. Behind them skim the fast runners, antennae flicking left to cut any alarm trails before defenders can rally. Slow the footage to 100 speed, and you'd see mid-air duels, jaws lock, legs saw, abdomens rupture in silent pops of yellow goo. Then the next wave surfs over the corpses. Defenders reach the choke point first. A major wedges her plug-shaped head into the tunnel mouth, sealing it like a cork. 3 attackers grab her antennae and yank. She topples backward, still biting, and the gate collapses. Behind her, workers link legs to form a living barricade. It holds for 10 heartbeats. Then the attackers spray formic acid in a fine mist. The wall hisses, bubbles, and slumps into twitching pieces. Defenders switch tactics. A cadre of tiny miners scuttle along the ceiling and start droplet bombing. Each droplet is iridomyrmecin, a pheromone that scrambles navigation. Suddenly, the raiding column can't tell left from right. Ants spin, call-eyed, clog the passage. For a moment, the tide stalls. But the attackers roll forward, their decontamination squad. Workers with swollen abdomens packed full of neutralizing enzymes. They lick the contaminated walls, erase the enemy scent, repaint the trail in their own hydrocarbon ink. 30 seconds later, the jam is cleared, and the advance resumes. They reach the fungus garden, an underground orchard of white filaments the defenders cultivate for food. Raiders don't burn it, they steal it. Workers slice, fist-sized chunks, roll them into bundles, and hand them down a newly carved escape tunnel. Others peel off toward the nursery. Their target isn't food, it's future labor. Larvae that will be rescented and raised as slaves. The queen's chamber lies at the end of a corkscrew tunnel. Defenders have plugged it with their last line of defense, suicide bombers. These ants have pre-ruptured glands. Their abdomens are already leaking glue. The moment attackers bite in, the defenders explode, spraying resin that hardens in midair. It's the insect equivalent of scuttling a ship to block a harbor. The blast buys 38 seconds. 38 seconds is enough. While the main force is still locked in glue, a Black Ops team slips through a forgotten ventilation shaft behind the queen's chamber. They clamp their mandibles around her wings, drag her screaming into the dark. Her pheromone trail, once a lighthouse for her own workers, now becomes a breadcrumb path for kidnappers. 4 minutes after the first scout entered the shaft, the battle is over. Not by treaty, not by surrender, but because the queen herself is gone. Without her scent, the colony's cohesion evaporates like steam. Workers wander in circles, Soldiers switch to evacuation. Larvae are abandoned where they curl. The victors retreat through their pre-dug escape tunnel, carrying fungus, larvae, and the still struggling queen. Behind them, the fortress collapses into a mausoleum. Rewind and freeze, one frame. The exact moment the queen's left antenna is severed. A defender still clings to her leg, mandibles locked, even though her abdomen is already sliced open. She'll never know if her sacrifice mattered. Evolution doesn't grant epilogue. Yet her death is data. The next generation will hatch with thicker armor, faster reflexes, because the genes that built her also built the survivors who will rebuild. And the victors? By nightfall, they've excavated a new chamber, grafted stolen fungus onto their own crop, and begun resenting kidnapped larvae so they'll grow up singing the anthem of their captors. In 3 weeks, no one will remember which tunnels were whose. The map will be redrawn in chemical ink. Above ground, the dandelion still stands, oblivious. Its root once threaded through an empire. Now it threads through a graveyard. And somewhere beneath your shoe, the next border dispute is already brewing. The dust hasn't settled. It never really does underground. 24 hours after the queen's abduction, the conquered nest is a hollow echo chamber. Fungus gardens wilt without manicured humidity. Larvae desiccate in abandoned nurseries, and the last stragglers mill aimlessly, their colony's chemical Wi-Fi password suddenly wrong. Above them, the victors are already renovating. They've bricked up the old ventilation shafts, laid down new pheromone highways, and installed the stolen queen, still alive, wings clipped, legs shackled in living chains of minor workers, into a freshly carved oubliette. She will never see daylight again, but her ovaries will pump out eggs for the enemy until she dies of exhaustion. Her daughters, incubated in the victors' brood chambers, will hatch smelling like strangers, and grow up to guard the very colony that murdered their mother. This is not cruelty, it is economy. In ant arithmetic, a queen is a printing press for future workers. Killing her is like burning cash. So they keep her, parasite turned prisoner, while her genome is quietly overwritten by the victor's sperm. Over generations, the two bloodlines merge, and no one below ground remembers whose anthem they're humming. But the ripples keep spreading. Up on the surface, the park looks the same. Dandelions nod, joggers pass. A toddler drops a cookie. Yet the soil's microbial galaxy has shifted. The conquered colony used to farm a specific strain of fungus that secreted antibiotic-suppressing harmful molds. Without them, those molds bloom, altering which seedlings sprout, which insects graze, which birds nest. Ecologists call it a trophic cascade, triggered by a mandible-sized coup. One queen dragged 3 centimeters sideways, and 6 months later, the canopy composition on that patch of earth tilts from oak saplings to maple. Zoom farther out. In Argentina, supercolonies of Linopithema, humal have erased native ant diversity across 3 continents, turning biodiverse understories into monocultures of themselves. In Africa, Megaponera raiders keep termite populations in check, preventing overgrazing of wood that would otherwise collapse termite mounds and reshape savanna hydrology. Every war underground is a gear turning in the planetary engine, and the ants keep evolving faster than we can catalog. Where raids are frequent, colonies invest in thicker cuticles and shorter generation times. Where slaves are taken, queens evolve higher fecundity to offset losses. In some lineages, workers have begun sprouting spines in places spines never existed, an arms race measured in micron. One lab in Kyoto recorded a phytol population that over 15 generations shifted the ratio of minor to major workers from 9:1 to 2:1 after repeated invasion. The colony didn't decide. The math simply favored bigger heads. There is even evidence of culture. In southern Japan, Polyarchis ants have been observed teaching nestmates a novel route to a sugar source by tandem running, literally pulling slower ants along until they memorize landmarks. The route persists across seasons, outliving any individual ant. When a neighboring colony copies the route, the first group escalates patrols, not to defend the sugar, but to defend the intellectual property. Ants, it seems, can trademark a highway. Which brings us, inevitably, to the mirror. We like to think our wars are products of ideology, religion, or economics. Grand narratives no six-legged speck could fathom. Yet strip away the flags and speeches, and we too are fighting over calories, territory, reproductive odds. The algorithms are the same: scout, assess, escalate, consolidate. We build walls, lay tripwires, drop pheromone trails called laws and borders. We steal labor in the form of captive populations and rewrite their identities within a generation. And when the queen, call her a monarch, a president, a CEO, is deposed, the colony either adapts or fractures. Take the Mongol Empire. At its height, it spanned from Korea to Hungary, held together not by bureaucracy, but by the scent of shared loot and the promise of pasture. When the Khans died, the super colony fragmented into kanates that fought each other until the trails faded. Or consider the transatlantic slave trade, a literal harvesting of larvae, rescented and raised to enrich foreign nests. The ecological fallout, demographic collapse in Africa, plantation monocultures in the Americas, mirrors the ant cascade on a continental scale. Even our technology rhymes. Ants invented agriculture, air conditioning, antibiotics, and urban planning long before we did. They use fungus to break down cellulose. We use yeast to ferment grain. They ventilate with chimney shafts. We ventilate with HVAC. Their formic acid is our tear gas. Their living plugs are our suicide bombers. The difference is speed. Ants iterate in generations. We iterate in years. But the selective pressures, resource limits, pathogen load, neighbor hostility, are the same. So, what can we learn? First, that cooperation and conflict are not opposites. They are two settings on the same dial. A colony that never raids starves. A colony that raids too much exhausts itself. The most stable super colonies are not the largest, but the ones that negotiate borders through ritual displays, rather than total war. Argentine ants, for all their dominance, collapse when drought forces them to march beyond the reach of their pheromone trails. Size is no substitute for sustainability. Second, that identity is fluid. A larva's allegiance is determined by the first hydrocarbon lullaby it smells. Change the scent, change the nation. We see echoes in language acquisition, religious conversion, the way third-generation immigrants root for their new country's soccer team. The ants remind us that culture is not innate. It is painted on, molecule by molecule, and can be repainted. Third, that every war seeds the next piece. The abandoned tunnels become condos for beetles, fungus farms for springtails, nurseries for nematodes. A queen's death is an ecosystem's birth. In human terms, the Marshall Plan, the European Union, the post-war baby boom, all are our ecological succession written in asphalt and steel. As we surface, let's leave the ants to their endless remix. The dandelion still stands, unaware that its root once threaded an empire. Somewhere beneath your shoe, a scout is tasting the air, running the calculus of calories and risk. She will decide peace or war, without a single synapse we would recognize as thought. And yet her decision will ripple up through soil, plants, herbivores, predators, weather patterns, until it brushes the edge of your life in ways you may never notice. Maybe tomorrow, you'll drop a cookie crumb. An ant will find it, lay a trail, summon sisters. Maybe the colony that claims it borders another, and the border is tense. Maybe tonight, 3 centimeters below where you sit, an epic siege begins. You won't hear it, you won't see it, but you are already part of the story. Another species whose wars and alliances shape the same spinning planet. The battlefield never closes. It just changes scale.